The sympathy cards were still stacked on the kitchen counter, unopened, when my stepdaughters asked me to sit down for a talk. I remember standing at the kitchen window when Renata called to say she and her sister were on their way over. She'd flown in from Denver the morning of the funeral, dressed in head-to-toe black that looked custom-fitted. Not like grief, like a costume. Her younger sister, Petra, had driven up from Austin with her boyfriend, a guy named Colt who wore loafers to the graveside service and shook nobody's hand. And now, 3 days later, they wanted to talk. I knew what was coming before they even knocked. You get a sense for these things after a while. I'd been married to my husband, Gerald, for 19 years. 19 years of watching how his daughters operated, how they moved through a room, how they smiled right before they asked for something. I'd learned to read the body language the way you learn to read weather, not because you want to, but because your survival starts to depend on it. I made a pot of coffee and waited. Renata came through the door first. She was 51, with Gerald's sharp cheekbones and a way of carrying herself that said she expected rooms to rearrange themselves around her. Petra followed, 47. Softer in appearance but just as calculating underneath. Colt stayed in the car, which I appreciated. One less audience member for whatever was about to happen. Beverly, Renata said, setting her handbag on the kitchen table like she already owned it. Thank you for having us. I hadn't invited them. They'd invited themselves, but I nodded and poured the coffee. She didn't wait long. Renata had never been one for small talk, especially when there was money to discuss. She opened a folder she'd brought with her, thick, tabbed, labeled with color-coded stickers that told me she'd had a lawyer prepare this before Gerald was even buried, and set it on the table between us. Dad's estate, she said. We need to walk you through some things. I looked at the folder but didn't reach for it. What kind of things? Petra wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and gave me the look I'd seen 100 times over the years. The careful, practiced expression of someone pretending to be gentle while delivering a blade. We know this is incredibly hard, Beverly, losing Dad so suddenly. None of us were prepared. None of them had been in Tulsa for the last 4 months. Gerald had been diagnosed with a progressive heart condition in March, and by June he was in and out of the hospital twice a week. I'd driven every one of those trips. I'd sat in every waiting room, filled out every form, talked to every specialist. Renata had called on Sundays. Sometimes, Petra had texted. But I didn't say any of that. I just kept my hands flat on the table and listened. Renata began walking me through the documents. The house, our house. The 4-bedroom Craftsman in Stillwater, Oklahoma that Gerald and I had renovated together over 3 summers. Stripping wallpaper and refinishing floors and choosing every light fixture as a team. Was valued at roughly $680. Per the will she was referencing, it would pass jointly to her and Petra. The lake house in eastern Oklahoma. The one Gerald had inherited from his parents and where we'd spent every 4th of July for 19 years. Also to the daughters. The business. Gerald had owned a small chain of commercial HVAC companies across 3 counties. Was valued at approximately $1.1 million in assets and contracts. That, too, would go to Renata and Petra, with a managing partner already lined up to handle operations. And for me? A life insurance policy, $250,000. Renata slid the page toward me and tapped it with one finger. We want to make sure you're comfortable, she said. That policy should give you a solid cushion while you get back on your feet. Get back on your feet. As if I'd fallen. As if 19 years of marriage had left me sprawled on the floor somewhere. Disoriented and helpless. There's also the matter of Gerald's outstanding medical bills. Petra added, almost as an afterthought. The insurance covered most of it. But there's still roughly $130 unaccounted for. Since you were his spouse and were involved in his care decisions. The billing department will likely come to you first. I did the math quietly in my head. $250,000. Minus $130,000 in medical debt. That left me with $120,000. Enough to buy a used car and rent an apartment for about 3 years. If I was careful, before I was starting completely from scratch at 61 years old. I see, I said. We've given you 60 days in the house. Renata added. We know that's tight, but we do have buyers interested and we'd like to move quickly. I nodded. I think I even thanked them. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure. What I remember clearly is that they finished their coffee, packed up the folder, and left me sitting alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. My attorney's name was Donna Chastain, and she had been practicing estate law in Stillwater for 30 years. She was 64, compact, with reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain and a habit of pressing her fingertips together when she was thinking through something complicated. She did that a lot during our first meeting after the funeral. The will they're referencing, she said, her fingertips pressed together, was executed 11 years ago. Before your marriage, Beverly, before Gerald built most of what he built in the last decade. There are significant grounds for a spousal rights challenge here. Oklahoma law protects surviving spouses. We could contest this. How long would that take? She tilted her head. Realistically, 18 months to 3 years. These situations have a way of dragging out, especially when both sides are motivated. And in the meantime? You'd need to find somewhere to live. The house would likely be frozen in probate, so neither party could sell. The medical bills would continue to accrue interest. She paused. It would not be comfortable. I looked out her window at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan. Toddler on her hip, completely unbothered by anything, just going about her Tuesday. I thought about what that felt like. Just going about your Tuesday. What if I didn't contest it? I asked. Donna set her glasses down. I'm sorry? What if I accepted the terms as presented? Signed everything over, took the insurance payout, and walked away? She was quiet for a long moment. Beverly, you would be voluntarily surrendering your spousal rights to an estate that you have a legal and moral claim to. As your attorney, I can't recommend that. I'm not asking you to recommend it. I'm asking what the process would look like. Another pause. Longer this time. We'd need releases, agreement on the medical debt responsibility, clean documentation that no future claims could be brought. If they agreed to absorb the medical debt from the estate before distribution, you'd walk away with the full insurance payout. $250,000. Yes. And how quickly? 2-3 weeks. A month at most if they're motivated. They were definitely motivated. I looked back out the window. The woman with the minivan was gone. Just an empty parking space and the flat Oklahoma sky. Draft the papers, I said. Donna looked at me the way people look at someone standing at the edge of something they can't quite see the bottom of. There's something you're not telling me, she said quietly. And she was right, but I wasn't ready to explain it yet. Not until I understood it myself. Gerald had always kept a small wooden box in the back of his closet. Not locked, just a plain cedar box. The kind you find at craft stores. With a simple brass latch. He'd had it for as long as I'd known him. I'd asked about it once. Years ago, and he'd smiled and said it was where he kept things he didn't want to forget. I'd respected that. In 19 years, I'd never opened it. I opened it the night after my meeting with Donna. Inside, wrapped in a piece of navy felt, was a key, not a house key or a car key, smaller, flatter, the kind that opens a lockbox or a storage unit. Beneath it was a folded note in Gerald's handwriting. Not a letter, just a few lines. Bev, if something's happened, go to store safe on Harper Road. Unit 114. Everything you need is there. Don't go alone. Call Meredith first. Meredith Walsh, Gerald's attorney, not Donna, a different attorney. One I'd met exactly twice at firm events over the years. A woman with close-cropped silver hair and the calm energy of someone who had seen absolutely everything and was surprised by none of it. I called her the next morning. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been expecting me. Beverly, she said, I was wondering when you'd reach out. I'm so sorry about Gerald. He was a remarkable man. He left me a note, I said, told me to call you before going to his storage unit. A brief silence. Yes. I know about the unit. Gerald and I worked together for the last 8 months of his life on something fairly involved. I'd like to explain everything in person. If that's all right, can you come to my office today? Meredith Walsh's office was in Oklahoma City, 45 minutes from Stillwater. She met me in the lobby herself and walked me upstairs to a conference room where a thick accordion file was already sitting on the table, labeled with my name. She poured water, sat down across from me, and began. Gerald came to me last October, she said. He'd just received his diagnosis, and he was trying to understand exactly what his estate looked like. In the process of reviewing his documents, he discovered something that concerned him a great deal. She opened the accordion file and pulled out a series of printed bank statements. Are you familiar with the name Renata's company, Parcel Holdings LLC? She has a real estate investment company. Yes, she does. And over the course of approximately 3 years, Parcel Holdings received 17 wire transfers from Gerald's business accounts, totaling just under $290. I stared at the statements. The numbers were there, plain as anything. He didn't authorize those? He did not. His bookkeeper, a woman who retired 2 years ago, was apparently close with Renata and either didn't notice or chose not to report the discrepancies. Gerald only discovered them when he hired an outside firm to audit the business in preparation for his estate planning. Meredith folded her hands on the table. He didn't want to believe it at first. He had the audit repeated by a second firm. Same result. I thought about Renata at the kitchen table, tapping the insurance policy page with one manicured finger. Comfortable. That was the word she'd used. That policy should give you a solid cushion. She had helped herself to $290 of Gerald's money. And now she was sitting across from me calculating whether I'd be comfortable. What about Petra? I asked. Meredith nodded. Petra's situation is different. She and Colt purchased a lake property in Arkansas 18 months ago using a personal loan that was co-signed by Gerald, without Gerald's knowledge or consent. His signature was forged on the co-signer documents. That loan is currently in default, and the lender has already begun preliminary collection proceedings against Gerald's estate. 2 daughters, 2 schemes, and their father, sick and exhausted, had discovered both while sitting in hospital waiting rooms and trying to figure out what to leave behind. He was going to confront them? I asked. He considered it. He decided against it. She paused. He said he'd spent his whole life cleaning up after their mistakes and it had never changed anything. He wanted to do something different this time. So what did he do? Meredith smiled. It was a small, measured smile, but there was something in it that made me sit up straighter. He planned, she said, very carefully, for 8 months. The storage unit on Harper Road contained filing boxes, organized by color-coded tabs in Gerald's neat handwriting. Every financial document related to both the unauthorized transfers and the forged loan. An independent appraisal of the business, not the $1.1 million figure Renata had cited, but $2.3 million, reflecting contracts she hadn't mentioned and accounts she didn't know about. A second life insurance policy, for $400, with only my name on it. And at the back of the unit, in a banker's box labeled simply Final, a will, executed 7 weeks before Gerald's death. Signed, witnessed, notarized, and filed with Meredith's office. The will left everything to me. The house, the lake house, the business, all of it, but there was a clause. One specific paragraph that I read 3 times standing in that storage unit with the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Asterisk in the event that my daughters, Renata Louise Ashby and Petra Jean Holloway, present or attempt to enforce any prior estate document, I direct my wife, Beverly Ann Whitaker, to present this instrument to any court of competent jurisdiction and to pursue all available legal and civil remedies against both individuals, including but not limited to restitution of funds improperly transferred from my business accounts and recovery of all losses resulting from forged financial instruments. He hadn't just protected me. He'd set a trap. And Renata, sitting in my kitchen with her color-coded folder, had already stepped into it. The weeks that followed were a careful game of stillness. Meredith advised me to say nothing to Renata and Petra about what I'd found. To continue cooperating with the estate process. Let them believe I was signing away my rights. And wait until the moment was precisely right. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Renata called twice a week with updates, always framed as helpfulness. She'd found a real estate agent for the Stillwater house. She said she'd spoken to the HVAC business's managing partner about transition timelines. She'd gotten an estimate on the lake house repairs. Every call was brisk, efficient, and just barely warm enough to be plausible. Petra texted instead of calling. She'd send photos of things she'd already mentally claimed from the house: the dining room set, the outdoor furniture, the wrought iron headboard that Gerald and I had found at an estate sale in Muskogee 7 years ago. I responded to everything with single-word politeness. Sounds good. Okay, thanks. My attorney Donna called midway through the third week. She'd drafted the papers Renata's attorney had requested and wanted me to come in to review. I sat across from her and read through 40 pages of legalese that methodically stripped away every right I'd held as Gerald's wife. "You can still walk away from this," Donna said quietly. I turned to the signature page. "I know. Beverly." "I know, Donna. Schedule the signing." She looked at me the way Meredith had looked at me, like she was trying to see past the surface of what I was saying to whatever was underneath. She'd seen something like this before, I suspected. Women giving things away that they shouldn't. Under pressure they shouldn't have to feel. She couldn't know I was doing the opposite of what it looked like. The signing was scheduled for a Thursday morning at a downtown title company. Donna attended. Renata and Petra attended with their attorney, a heavy-set man named Barton who had the self-satisfied energy of someone who'd never once been surprised by anything. Meredith was not present. That was intentional. Renata arrived in a cream blazer and pearl earrings. Petra wore a dress I recognized. It was one she'd borrowed from a neighbor of mine 18 months ago and apparently never returned. They sat across the table from me and Donna, with Barton between them, and everyone exchanged the kind of pleasantries that exist purely to paper over the fact that nobody in the room actually means anything they're saying. Barton organized the documents. There were a lot of them. As he sorted through the stack, he paused. The pause was small, maybe 2 seconds, but Donna noticed it. And I noticed it, and something shifted in the air of that room the way it shifts right before a storm rolls in. He turned to page 4. "Read something." Turned to page 5. "Read something else." "Mrs. Ashby," he said, using Renata's married name. His voice was very controlled. "Did you review the full packet your office sent over?" Renata tilted her head. "Of course. All of it, including the attachment that came through yesterday afternoon from the Walsh firm?" Renata's composure flickered, just slightly. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Barton turned his laptop around to show her the screen. Meredith's office had filed Gerald's actual will with the probate court at 9 a.m. that morning, 40 minutes before the signing was scheduled to begin. They had also submitted to the court a certified copy of the audit findings regarding parcel holdings, and a formal complaint regarding the forged cosigner documents on Petra's Arkansas loan. All of it was now part of the public record. Renata went very still. Petra looked at her sister with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not the careful softness she usually performed. Not the false concern. But something raw and frightened and very young. "What is this?" Renata said quietly. I folded my hands on the table. "It's Gerald's final wishes," I said. "The real ones." Barton cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitaker, I have to be honest. I was not aware of any of this when I prepared these documents. I'd like to request a recess to speak with my clients." "Of course," I said. They left the room. Donna leaned toward me, her voice low. "You knew this was coming." "I did." "For how long?" "Long enough." She sat back. For the first time since Gerald's death, she smiled. Really smiled, not the careful, professional expression she'd been offering me for weeks, but an actual, unguarded smile. "He was something else," she said, "wasn't he? He really was." The recess lasted 40 minutes. When Renata, Petra, and Barton returned to the table, the architecture of the whole situation had completely rearranged itself. Barton was professional, which I respected. He laid out the situation plainly. The will they'd been relying on was superseded. The new will was filed and valid. The probate court had already been notified. The financial evidence Meredith had submitted created significant civil, and potentially criminal, exposure for both Renata and Petra. Renata kept her chin up. I'll give her that. Even when everything was collapsing, she held herself like she'd expected to land on her feet. This is Gerald's estate, she said. Whatever manipulation happened here. Renata, my voice came out quieter than I intended. But it stopped her cold. Your father discovered what you took from him. He documented all of it. He spent the last 8 months of his life. When he was sick, when he was exhausted, when he should have been resting, he spent those months making sure I was protected from what you were planning. A long silence. He didn't expose you, I continued. He could have. He chose not to, because despite everything, he was your father and he didn't want to see you in criminal court. But he also wasn't willing to let you walk away with everything and leave me with nothing. So he gave me the choice. What choice? Petra asked. Her voice was very small. Whether to pursue restitution and criminal referrals, or to accept what the new will outlines and consider it finished. Another silence. Longer. And what does the new will outline? Renata asked. The estate transfers to me. You each receive a trust, modest, paid out annually, not accessible as a lump sum. It cannot be used to pay existing debts, which means it won't help with Colt's defaulted loan or your creditors in Denver. I paused. But it's something, which is considerably more than you were planning to give me. Barton spoke in a low voice to Renata. She listened, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the table. Then she nodded once, sharply, and said nothing more. The signing proceeded. Different documents this time, Meredith's, not Barton's. I signed as primary beneficiary. Renata and Petra signed acknowledgement of the trust terms. It took 27 minutes. Nobody made eye contact. As they were leaving, Petra stopped in the doorway. I don't know what I expected her to say. An apology, maybe, or another attempt at manipulation. But she just looked at me for a long moment, really looked. Without the performance, and then she said, he talked about you all the time. You know, when he called on Sundays, he'd spend half the call telling me things you'd said or done. He thought you were the funniest person he'd ever met. I didn't trust myself to respond. I nodded. She left. I kept the Stillwater house. It took me a while to decide, because every room in it still felt thick with Gerald, his reading chair, the coffee mug he'd left on the counter the morning of his last hospital visit, the garden we'd planted together along the south fence. For a while it felt too heavy to live in. But then something shifted. I started to understand that the weight wasn't grief. Exactly. It was also love. And love, it turned out, was something I could carry. I brought in a bookkeeper and a business consultant to assess Gerald's HVAC companies. The business, at its actual valuation, was considerably healthier than Renata had presented. I had 3 options: sell, hire a full-time manager, or learn. I chose the third option, which surprised everyone, including me. I spent 6 months getting a crash course in commercial operations from the existing team. People who'd worked for Gerald for years and who, I discovered, had genuinely liked him. They were cautious with me at first. Then they weren't. The lake house I kept for summers and 2 weeks at Thanksgiving. I painted the kitchen a deep green that Gerald never would have allowed. And I decided I loved it. I settled the estate's legitimate medical debts from the business proceeds and closed that chapter cleanly. The forged loan on Petra's Arkansas property was referred to the lender's legal team. The parcel holdings transfers were handled through a civil settlement that Meredith negotiated efficiently and without fanfare. Nobody went to prison. I hadn't wanted that, but restitution was paid. I started a small program through the local community foundation, nothing grand. Just a fund for older women navigating estate disputes after a spouse's death. Women who didn't have a cedar box in the back of a closet, or a note pointing them toward a storage unit, or an attorney who'd been quietly building a case for 8 months. Women who were, in other words, exactly where I would have been without Gerald's planning. I named it the Gerald R. Whitaker Fund for Financial Dignity. It seemed right. Donna called when she saw the announcement in the local paper. I owe you an apology. she said. For what? For underestimating you. You weren't the first, I told her. You won't be the last. I've made peace with that. She laughed. He knew what he was doing when he married you. I looked out the kitchen window at the garden along the south fence, which was coming in beautifully this year. He did, I said, and so did I. The last thing I found in the storage unit, in a small envelope taped to the bottom of the final box, was a photograph I'd never seen before. It was taken at our wedding. Not one of the formal shots the photographer staged, those I'd seen 1,000 times. This was candid, clearly taken by a guest. In it, Gerald and I are turned away from the camera, facing the garden of the venue we'd chosen. His arm around my shoulders and my head tilted toward his. Neither of us is looking at anyone else. We're just talking, easy and close, the way two people talk when they know exactly where they belong. On the back of the photograph, Gerald had written 4 words. You always were enough. I have it on my desk now, in a small frame, right where I can see it. Some days I think about Renata in her cream blazer, sitting in my kitchen like she already owned the room. I think about Petra photographing my headboard from the doorway. I think about the 45-minute recess and the look on Barton's face when he got to page 4. And then I think about a man who spent his final months sick and scared and stubbornly loving, making sure that none of that would matter in the end, making sure I'd be standing exactly where I am now. I think he'd be pleased. And honestly, so am I.